So when the first big mashup, Godzilla versus Kong, was released, it was the first. I'll start again. It was one of the first major blockbusters in cinema since COVID had left an impact. Expectations were pretty low, but thanks to how poor the previous Godzilla movies were, really, the first one, while visually delightful, was a bit somber. The second one, not so great. We did have the fantastic Kong Skull Island, but teaming up these two iconic creatures, well, nobody was expecting much. But what Adam Wingard did, he brought a visual flair, a knowing wink to the audience, and a lot of fun. Now, it wasn't great, but what it did deliver was huge amounts of monsters beating seven bells out of each other, which is exactly what the audience paid for. And they got in abundance, because Adam Wingard knows how to choreograph monsters beating each other up and does it so well. So now he's back 3 years later, and from what we know at the box office, this film is going to make, well, I'm going to use the word impact. So we start out with a kind of a truce. Godzilla remains king and protector of the regular world, basically fights off the monster of the week. And they surface while Kong stays down below in Hollow Earth. And he's feeling lonely. He's the last of his kind, and he misses human interaction. Spurred on by, believe it or not, a dental issue, Kong comes back to our world and is thrust back into the world of humanity. But something greater is already starting to plague the dreams of Jai, played by Kaylee Hartle, who shares a bond with Kong and now lives with her adopted mother, the returning Rebecca Hall, that requires the arch enemies to go from versus to best buds. Okay, so as I said, Adam Wingard really knows how to modulate the tone for this film, and he's very good at putting the two monsters in great action sequence. But what he does forget is that the film also contains human beings. And that's where, for me, the film starts to fall apart. Because this bit becomes a bit of a mixed bag. Rebecca Hall's character of Dr. Andrews is just saddled with being the chief exponent of exposition. Brian Tyree Henry's returning podcaster Bernie is to provide the gags, and newcomer Dan Stevens, the trapper, a kind of monster vet. Not he's a monster who's a vet, he's a vet to monsters, has this kind of hippy-dippy, laid-back attitude, is there to be the straight man to Brian Tyree's one-liners. But the concentration isn't on the human beings. The concentration is, of course, on the monsters. If you like to see monsters beating seven bells out of each other every 10 minutes, then this is the film for you. And it's done with colourful, bright, and inventive set pieces, which absolutely shine. But it's basically action, a bit of exposition, more action, a little bit of exposition, no character growth whatsoever, more exposition, and more monsters beating seven bells out of each other. It almost becomes a bit of a parody. In fact, it almost feels like a video game, that you have the cutscenes where you need to know what the plot's going, to then be replaced only minutes later by more monster on beast action sequence. And after a while, Godzilla New Empire starts to take its toll. It's far too long to get to the main event, which we're all waiting for. And it takes far too long for us to even care about what's going on. Now, as an aside from that, I took the child, who's 11, who thought this was the greatest film of all time, for exactly the reasons that I've stated. I found it a little bit tiresome. This doesn't reinvent the wheel. This stays on track of being monster v monster. And if that's what you want, if you don't care about plot, if you want to see some creature titan bashing, then this film is for you. And it works. It works on that level. For me, about 20 minutes in, as I worked out the entire structure of the film, which I could have written on the side of a popcorn packet, then you might just find it a little bit tiresome. One thing I do want to mention is that we get to see some incredible locales on Earth being demolished by monster fighting monster. And I just kept thinking all the way through, those buildings have people in them, and those people are being decimated. The body count in this film is astronomical. And it felt a little bit, I don't know, a little bit morally unjust. I'm all for the morals this week's show, but I just kept thinking these creatures are demolishing hotels and high-rise blocks, and people are dying, and no one seems to care, because at the end of the film, it ends on an uploaded, ends on a nice wink to the camera that we've all done a great job. People are, while on the Earth, people are mourning lost. While on Earth, people are mourning their lost loved ones. And for that, it just didn't sit right, in the same way that Man of Steel felt as though it was just disaster porn. Did I like it? I can't say that I liked it. It did its job, but I can't see where this franchise can go from here. But looking at the box office, it's going to go somewhere. Starring and directed by Dev Patel, the movie is a very modern revenge thriller. In the Indian city of Yatana, a fighter, Dev Patel, with a monkey mask and not much to lose, sets out to avenge a wrong that ends up as a bloody political clash as well as a physical one. This is Dev Patel's directorial debut, and he said in his own words, if he wanted to be in an action movie, he was going to be the guy in the chair or the sidekick character, never the leading man. But what he's proved is he's not only strong in the director's chair, but he's a strong action star. This film got a lot of plaudits online. Sadly, it doesn't seem to have set the box office on fire, but the film was saved from Netflix by Universal after it'd been sat on the shelf for a couple of years, and at least it's got a cinema release, because this film is so cinematic. Andy, did we love Monkey Man? I know you and I have got slightly different opinions of this film, but I think we both thoroughly enjoyed it.
I think we're not too far different, because, Dev Patel's first directing gig is mostly confident revenge thriller, exploring religion, cultism, and political corruption, and delivers sufficient violence on screen to appease those hungry for just simple carnage. And the opening act straight away dragged me in, because the direction on that opening act is absolute style and flair. We see the caste system from Yatana being explored. We traverse from the unseen elements to the high class corruption, but even the higher class elements look dark and dingy at the same time, capturing that corruption in a visual level. There's marvelous camera work and very swish editing. And then towards the end of the first act, there's the first act of attempt at revenge that Dev Patel's character goes for. And for some reason, the camera work suddenly becomes ridiculously erratic to the extent that you can't quite make out what's going on. And the editing becomes choppy. And I kind of got the feeling that it's probably attempting to emulate the inner turmoil of the character at the time, caught up in a situation that's spiraling out of control. But as when other films have tried to do this, the issue that I have is that we, the audience, need to be able to follow what's going on. Otherwise, we can swiftly lose interest. And I almost lost interest at that point. But
I've got to agree.
But it got to the second act, and it suddenly started to become a completely different beast. As it started to explore, in order to get his proper revenge, he not only has to be physically fit, but he has to be spiritually fit. And where does he get his best help? From a transgender religious community who helping tap into the spiritual side of himself and confront his past demons. And the last half of the film just becomes something amazing. It suddenly becomes very slick, very stylish. A lot of the fights influenced
Very
by
visceral.
films such as The Raid, very visceral. And it won me over in that final 2 acts. It won me completely back round. That first act just stumbled too much to make it a perfect film. But the rest of the film,
I've got to agree with you on everything you said. When we came out of the screening, we felt exactly the same. Yeah, I mean, it's got that sort of Jason Bourne style of handheld camera work, which is very dizzying and yes, puts you in on the action. But I wanted to do what John Wick's done very, very well and pull the camera back and see the action rather than be that close to it that I don't know what's going on. And often, especially in the first half of the movie, I didn't know what I was supposed to be looking at because shots are out of focus, shots cut very, very quickly. The second half, as you said, calms down. And it's an exhilarating ride. It's a very messy film. I can understand why this film's not grabbing the audiences because it veers between a bloody revenge flick in the style of a John Wick, and at times is a very poignant look at the caste system in India, where people are invisible and people are animals, considered to be animals by those in a higher priority of the world. And it does an awful lot of juggling, but most of the time he keeps the balls in the air, and it is at best a good, strong B movie that has elements to it which are very clever and very smart. Dev Patel has proved that he can be an A-list action star because he bulks up, and the choreography and the fight scenes are perfectly done. Again, especially in that second half.
I can be a bit forgiving with the use of the shaky camera within this, simply because this is Dev Patel's first time directing, and many directors on their first time of directing action resort to swift edits and shaky camera because they're not that confident with it. I mean, even Christopher Nolan, when he made Batman Begins, one of my criticisms in that was that there was a lot of shaky camera and editing that made it a bit choppy, but I was forgiving for him because he'd never tackled that kind of property before. He then became a lot better when he got to Dark Knight Returns, and it became a lot more fluid. So I think as a showcase for what Dev Patel can do, this really is a film that you can admire. You can admire the passion that he's put into it.
Yeah.
He came up with the story. He's front and center as the lead, and he's directed for the first time with something with so much going on in it. That's a lot of work, and you can admire that. Even if you can't completely enjoy it, you can thoroughly admire and respect. And it makes me very interested to see what Patel can do going forwards in a further directing gigs. I want to do a mention as well to a cameo that I didn't know was going to be in here, and that's Sharlto Copley as a ringmaster in the underground fighting world, who is just perfectly placed for all his smarm and charm. He is magnificent. I did not know he was in this film until he suddenly popped up on screen, and I had a big beaming smile on my face at him. I love Sharlto Copley. We'll watch him in anything.
So ultimately, a messy film, but a film that mainly Dev Patel delivers as a bloody action film that doesn't actually reinvent the genre, but pays homage to it and adds some interesting spices to it.